Somebody who is a history lover. I love history, as you do, and I think anyone who possibly is mildly aware of the partition that happened in 1947. Because I don't really refer to the partition per se, because there's a lot of literature on the Indian partition, but I do refer to it obliquely. I mean, I delve into more as an after effects of partition. So someone who has an idea would make life simpler. Anyone who has an interest in women, in empowerment of women, anyone who wants to learn how despite all the odds against them, people, I don't say only women, people did overcome their everything and did go on to have good lives. So I don't know if I've answered your question really well, but
everyone, welcome back to the Living the Next Chapter podcast. I have another amazing author on the show to talk about her journey, to share all of the things she's doing as an author, and to encourage you as an author. My guest is joining me not from Canada, not from the US, but somewhere wonderful and beautiful from around the world. And she's going to bring all of her wisdom and knowledge to us today and greet our listeners as well who are outside of North America. I'm so excited to have her here. Natasha, welcome to Living Next Chapter. Nice to have you here.
Hey, Dave, thank you so much for having me here. Such an honor to be here with you. Thank you.
Excellent. So you have to let everybody know, where are you from? And I would love if you could give a greeting to those listening from your part of the world.
Absolutely. I'm from India. Currently, I'm talking to you from Pune, which is very close to Bombay. And I want to greet all your listeners in Hindi. So here we go. Namaste. लिविंग द नेक्स्ट चैप्टर में आप सबका स्वागत है। मेरा नाम नताशा शर्मा है और आज मैं देव के शो पे उनकी गेस्ट हूँ। आप इस वर्ल्ड में कहीं पे भी हो तो ज़रूर इस पॉडकास्ट को सुनिए, और देव के काफ़ी सारे दूसरे पॉडकास्ट भी हैं, आप सब उनको भी सब्सक्राइब कीजिए। शुक्रिया।
Wonderful. And now everyone listening are like, oh, she's talking to me. And I think that's a great experience for our listeners. So thank you for doing that. And welcome to the show. It's glad to have you here. Let's start right off the bat. Let's talk about how this all started for you. How did your author journey begin?
When I was a child, I've always been extremely fond of books. And books, we already had books in our house. I mean, whether you sort of came first in class, or you won a competition, my mother would gift us books. And as all kids born in the 1978, 90 era, I read a lot of books that were available at that time. So there was Mallory Towers and the Famous Five and so on and so forth. So as a kid, I was always very eager to write my own story. And so I think I mentioned last time when we spoke too, I wrote a crossover between Mallory Towers and the Famous Five. Oh God, it's so bad. But anyways, that's when the bug bit me. And as most people who've probably come to your show, I think COVID was the time when all of us got some sort of a breather from normal life. And that's when I actually started writing again. Before that, from professional life, I used to write technical white papers and really boring stuff. But after 2020 is when I actually started writing serious fiction. So that's how it has been for me.
What type of authors, and any authors in particular that were inspirational for you? Somebody that you looked up to as an author and said, I like how they write?
Actually, a Canadian author, Louise Penny.
Oh, good.
She writes mystery novels, which is my first love. Mystery novels, courtroom drama, and romance, exactly in that order. And it's when I started reading her work is when I realized that she just doesn't write about the mysteries or solving the mysteries. It's It's the human relationships, the human emotions that she sort of unpeels in each of her books, which made me sort of sit back and say, wow, that's how I want to write. That's how I want to be able to delve into a human mind in addition to solving a mystery. And she's been a major inspiration for me to write in this genre at least.
It's great to find out whose inspiration is there for the author, because that helps to understand a little bit about how you write as well. Because I know for me, I'm a musician. I love music. And when I find an artist or a music that I love, it starts to help shape my music. And not that I'm copying them, but I find there's elements of their music in my music because I love it so much, right? And authors have the same thing where they love something they read, or they love an author, a style, and then they bring little pieces of that into how they write. So how did that author in particular, did they shape any of your writings at all?
A lot initially. So she has a very set way of writing, so she would take shorter sentences. She would possibly repeat a word over and over again for emphasis, which is how exactly I started out. And slightly over time, when you're very new, you do pick up instances of people that you like, and it permeates it through in your writing. But as you start finding your own voice, you make it your own. So initially, yes, I would say my style was very driven by loose penny. It didn't matter if I was writing a romance, or if I was writing a mystery, or if I was writing some other kind of drama fiction. But the way of writing was very similar to hers. And it's only now that I've sort of found my own voice. So I can say this is a Natasha original, but it was heavily inspired by loose penny.
So how would you feel if somebody was on a podcast and they said that you were the inspiration for their writing, and that they loved how you wrote, just the way you talked about that author that you admire? How would you feel if there was an author on a podcast today talking about the fact that they started writing because of you and you're their inspiration? How would that make you feel?
First, there would be a sense of disbelief. Then it would be like, wow, someone looks up to me.
Right.
It's such an ego boost. But more than that, jokes apart, it would feel wonderful to, authors generally are, they're very hesitant to put your work out because it puts you in a very vulnerable spot, because you're open to criticism, you're open to people telling you things you don't want to know. And if you can help someone in overcoming that fear, or overcoming that sort of little drawback, I would think that's an honor for me.
Yeah,
absolute honor.
It's a place of service, right? To know that someone finds value in what you do and you inspire them. It's a little humbling, actually, to know that you can have that kind of impact on someone.
Absolutely, because like how I found Luz Penny's work or other authors' work to sort of it validated my work to a large extent. So when you find someone who validates your work, and it gives you that sort of push to keep writing, and that I think it's the best gift that one can give anyone. The ability to have belief, or also believe in themselves that they can do it.
Now, before we get into more about your book, I'd love if you can give some advice or some encouragement to a young author on their journey of writing. Maybe they've just started recently to start their book, and they don't know what you know. You are the expert here. You've done something they haven't done. So you have knowledge that could really help them. So in service to them, what kind of things could you provide to them as some guidance as they write their book?
Sure. These are 3 or 4 tips that I have lived my life by, my writing career by. Is 1, research. I can't tell you how important it is to make sure that, if you're writing on a topic, you should know at least so much about it that you sort of are living there. A writer's journey is a lot about taking the readers along with them on the same journey. And if you don't know where you're going or where the place that you're going to looks like, it's difficult for you to take someone else along. So research as much as you can so that for that specific time, you are that place, you are in that place. But having said that, I want to give you a caveat. Research is extremely it's like a rabbit hole. Once you go down, it's very difficult to figure out where to stop. Each step takes you further and further into something which is more exciting. So limit the time you have. Say if you want to put 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 6 weeks, but limit your time that after this, I will start writing. Because it's important to do research, but it's also important to write about the research. And more often than not, what you have researched, maybe just a few, maybe only 5 or 10% would actually come out in your book. But that 5 and 10% would be so good that people would know that there is, a 90% of research sort of pushing that 10% out. So you don't have to dump everything. You just have to make sure that you are taking the person along with you. That's point number one. Point number two is there are people, most people, in fact, have a fear of word count. So, they feel that they can't overcome the hurdle of, say, 2,500 words, or say 3,000 words or 2,000 words. When you're writing a novel, which is classically anywhere above 60,000 words, don't think of 60,000 as a figure that sort of scares you. If you're used to writing shorter stories, if you're used to writing stories of 500 words or 2,000 words, think of each chapter as a short story in itself with the same character. So it would not be so scary for writers to sort of meet the deadline. Number three is not really a writing exercise sort of advice, but make sure you back your work, because it's very important to make sure you have copies of your work everywhere, so that in case of your laptop crashes, you have some sort of recovery. And the most important point that I cannot emphasize this enough: read. Read, 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 and read. Read genres that you don't write in. Read everything, consume everything, because every time you read, somewhere it goes inside your brain and it sits. So when you actually are writing, you don't even realize you're using things that you've learned when you're reading. So read as much as you can. It's going to make you a better writer anytime.
That is great advice.
I get very passionate about reading.
Good.
I'm sorry.
Yes. Everyone, when you're done here listening to this podcast, go read. Definitely do
Yes.
that. And maybe buy Natasha's book and read that. That's where you should start, right? Good plug. Okay, let's talk about your book, because you and I had the chance to have a conversation before we recorded today. You told me some stories that I went and told my wife, and we were just like heartbroken hearing some of the stories that have come out that we were unaware of here in Western culture, and not understanding the history of where you're from and some of the things that have happened in your part of the world. And you're bringing that to light through your book. So let's talk about the book. But you shared a story with me about a choice a mother had to make. And I'd love to talk about that a little bit more, because that has not let me alone. I still feel like I'm still dealing with that story myself. And I'd love for you to share that story as well. But tell us about the book. When did it come out? And, a little bit about the book before we dive into the history.
Right. My book is called Beneath Divided Skies. It deals with the biggest human migration of the 20th century that happened in 1947, which was India and Pakistan partition. The book came out in March of this year, 2024, and it deals with a not forgotten, rather I would say unknown aspect of the partition. The partition in Indian history, or in Pakistan history both, has been the biggest scar on our souls, which we have not really recovered, even though it has been so many years since then. And especially this month, because 15th August is our Independence Day. So it's the day when the British actually left us, and that's when India got our independence. And this, especially for me, means a lot because both my parents, my mother and my father, were migrants who had to come in from Pakistan into India, or whether it was united India at the same time, but it was segregated as Pakistan and India. And the part they happened to stay in was declared as Pakistan. And for me to understand the partition literature doesn't talk about how and what happened to women is astounding to such an extent that I cannot really imagine that there are very few official papers that really talk about partition through a gendered view. And it was the women who bore the brunt of the partition, which is something which happens even now for any war. It's usually the women who are used as tools to bring down the other community. And this is the cross that women do carry. And despite partition being such a huge thing in the history of India and Pakistan, we've not captured what women went through during these times. And through research, I realized that those India and Pakistan sort of came together despite all the political tensions. They came together and they formed something called the Inter-Dominion Act, which said that any woman who has been forced to convert, has been kidnapped, should be brought back to her country of religion. So if it was a Hindu woman who was forced to convert to Islam, she would be brought back to India. And if it was a Muslim woman who was in India, she could have a choice to stay either in India or go back to or go to Pakistan. And even though governments make rules, it's very difficult to actually implement these rules because on paper it sounds good, but men weren't ready to give up spoils of war, that is, their women. So social workers would actually go undercover. They would find out where hostages were staying in, and they would then give this information to, if they were in Pakistan, they would give it to the Pakistan Army or the Pakistan police, and if they were in India, they would give it to the Indian counterparts. And then the rescue would happen, and then women were sort of being sent back. And what this law just later adopted in India as the Rescue and Restoration Act of 1949, what it did not take into consideration was the woman's choice. So if you are, say, if I'm a Hindu girl and if I've been forced to convert to Islam and I'm married and I'm staying in Pakistan, I don't have a choice but to come back. So even if I have kids there, I have to leave those children there because those children are now Pakistani citizens. Abortion in those times, 1947, was illegal. But even then, Indian governments were running abortion clinics. So if I happened to be pregnant at that point, and at a stage where I could undergo an abortion, I was forced to undergo an abortion. If not, then I was forced to give up the child for adoption. So as a woman, it didn't really matter to me who took me away, because they say that the Rescue and Restoration Act was also a forced kidnapping in its own way. It had its heart in the right place. I don't say that the act was wrong. There were some women who genuinely were rescued and did want to come back, but there were some women who had formed families and who had children, and they didn't want to come back, but they had no choice. They would be forced to come back. And there were times when the social workers who were, they were law officers of either India or Pakistan, it was such a dichotomy for them. As women, you understand the trauma that somebody is forced to, is uprooted all over again. But by law, you have to sort of follow the law. And this is the beauty of the law, that it tried to help people, but it just didn't. It was sort of a blanket rule for all. And this is what my book basically deals with. It tells you a story of a girl who underwent the partition, who moved to India and joined one of these covert outfits who would go undercover and rescue women. She views the entire partition, the law, through her eyes. And this is what I wanted to bring out, that, despite the law being flawed, women did show bravery. And it's not that, these women were not abused in the partition. They were also abused, but they chose to not just be a victim, but they went beyond it, and they became they became rescuers themselves. So that is the beauty, that they have the strength to pick up the pieces, assimilate it, and then go and save someone else's life from undergoing the same trauma that they did.
What was the time frame for the partition? Like, was this over a period of years, months? Like, how long was this period?
So the rights sort of started in India in 1946. The partition went on. It went on for quite some time. People kept moving in. So there was one section of which they're called the Sindhis. They come from the Sindh region, and they assimilate parts of Sufism, and Hinduism. So they thought they could stay in Pakistan they were relatively safer. But as time went by, they realized that it wasn't really conducive. So they kind of moved a little later, maybe a year later than the rest of the Indian and Sikh public moved to India. The partition actually kept on going for a long time. Even the Rescue and Restoration Act went on for about, officially it went on, it was repealed in 1957, but it started in 47. So it went on for 10 years unofficially and 8 years officially.
Wow. Okay. So that's a long period of time, right?
There were a lot of cases where women would divorce. So in those times, women's citizenship was determined by three factors. One was her religion at birth. One was either her father's religion or her husband's religion. And third was a combination of all three. So we were just never asked, where we wanted to go. We just went where we were sent. That's how it breaks down.
And okay, so we talk about, protecting women's rights. We talk about women having rights in our world today. And it just seemed like back then that women were just kind of property in a sense, that they could be moved around and just, no say, no choice.
No choice.
You go here, you go there.
You leave your kids, you give up your kids, you don't get a choice to be with your kids, you don't get a choice to be with your husband, you don't get a choice to choose your husband, you don't get a choice for basically anything, whether, which religion do I want to follow, which country do I want to stay in. So things of course have come a really, really, really long way since 1947. But really nothing changes to a large extent. Women are still used as a tool to bring the family name down. Interesting fact was that a lot of these rescuers, social workers who did rescue these women, they would be brought back and they would stay in Indian government. I know the story from India because that's where I stay in. So they would stay in these Indian government ashrams, and their families would not take them back because these women were raped or had given birth to children who were of the other religion. So these women, even though it was their families who actually raised requests to look for them, when they were found, they would not be accepted back into in their household because they were defiled or they were impure. And they actually continued to stay in the government ashrams, the government houses that the Indian government had built for them, which sort of led a lot of the women to question that, why did you bring me here to live a life alone? I was anyway sort of happy there wherever I was. But yes, the Indian government did teach these women, occasional skills like embroidery or knitting or stitching. So they did earn their living. It's just that they had no choice to decide where they would stay primarily.
So Natasha, for the readers that are listening to this, who would you say would be an ideal reader for your book? Do you have somebody in mind?
Somebody who is a history lover. I love history, as you do, and
Yes.
I think anyone who possibly is mildly aware of the partition that happened in 1947. Because I don't really refer to the partition per se, because there's a lot of literature on the Indian partition, but I do refer to it obliquely. I mean, I delve into more as an after effects of partition. So, someone who has an idea would make life simpler. Anyone who has an interest in women, in empowerment of women, anyone who wants to learn how despite all the odds against them, uh, people, I don't say only women, people did overcome their everything, and did go on to have good lives. So I don't know if I've answered your question really well, but
Yeah, no, that's good, because I want people listening to go, this is the ideal book for me. And I love history, and I love women's history. The one thing about history that I know is that if we don't pay attention to history, we are bound to repeat it to some degree, and we don't want to repeat what happened here, right? We want to learn from this and do better in our life. So if we ignore history, I think we do that at our own peril. That's not a good thing to do. We do need to learn from history. So that's why I love your book, and the idea that you're putting this out there for us to learn from.
okay.
Yeah. For anybody that wants to write anything related to history, you talked about at the beginning about doing your research and reading and doing all your study. Anything else that helps you to write a historically based book like you have? Is there any other tools that you use to help you write?
A lot of anecdotal evidence. So you speak to a lot of people, because again, the literature that exists on partition is very dry. Like 10,000 people moved here, and cities were built, and there was mayhem, and there was mobs, and they were writing, but there is no emotion attached to it. So you don't know what I would have felt when I was actually walking on those roads, which were strewn by the dead bodies and people attacking you at any time. So the emotional angle would not come through from the papers. So I spoke to a lot of people who have actually undergone the partition, people who were about maybe all ranges, people who actually moved in from Pakistan into India. I also spoke to people who were in India to understand that when the refugees or the migrants moved into India, what kind of situation did they speak, did they face, what languages were spoken in India, what was kind of food you got in India at that time. Punjab, the Western Punjab, where the partition, where it is in Pakistan right now, it primarily dealt with wheat, whereas India was more of millets. So, that kind of information, what kind of mode of transport. All this, I got this idea when I spoke to a lot of people, and people are very kind enough to give me a lot of their time to tell me how their experiences went. And that, I think when you talk to people, it gives you a sense of uh, the emotional sort of atmosphere that was there for the people who moved in and for the people who were already here, and that you will not get in a white paper, or in any kind of official document. So I think speaking to people is really important when you're writing historical, because a lot of things don't get tracked onto paper. A lot of anecdotes just sort of go by the word of mouth. So it's very important to capture those facts.
What is it like for you in your part of the world, knowing that you have readers in North America and Western culture reading your book? How does that make you feel to know that your book is traveling the world?
Very humbling, because a lot of time India is seen as, not now as much, but it's seen as a very backward kind of a place. And something that I always wanted to show is that despite the kind of challenges we have faced, and despite the kind of the British took away everything. We were left, our economy suffered because of that. But despite every single thing, we do work, hard, we persevere, and our women are now, uh, and in a good position. And it's amazing to know that other people are also peeping into our history, peeping into the strength that we have within ourselves. And that's the best part. It's there's just so much of knowledge transfer, right? I read books about your culture, you read books about my culture, and we get to understand each other more. And we understand that history doesn't it's not that history is would be repeated only in India. That history could repeat also, say, in Canada or in France.
Right.
It's important to know history everywhere. It could happen in the place that you reside in.
Yeah, there's lessons to learn from history every time, and that's what I love. That's what I love about authors like you, is that you bring that history forward for us to learn from and to share. And when we don't know those stories, you putting this into the world helps us to understand better. So that's what I love about what you do.
What's interesting is, despite both my parents having undergone the partition, were unaware of this law, the rescue and restoration law. I mean, of course, I don't blame them. At that point, saving your life, was more important than a law. But quite a few Indians are not aware of this. In fact, a large population of India is not aware of this law, which is why I felt it must be out, because it's such an interesting look at our history, especially the way we treat sort of war, prisoners of war to a large extent.
Wow. Yeah, I love having you on. This is exciting. As you kind of work through the book, what kind of responses have you had back from readers about the book? Have you heard back from your readers?
Yes. And okay. So I've never had a step parent. And in one of there's this line that I use in the book where I say that it's an inner monologue going on to a guy's mind. He says that for him, partition was like a stepmother who, was watching her two step kids sort of fight it out. Okay, and of course, the stepmother is the Radcliffe line, and the two stepchildren are India and Pakistan. And of course, I absolutely had no idea about it. And I set it out in the world, and people read it. And I got back a friend of mine who happens to be a stepmother. So she got to me and she said, I will not mention this in my review, but I just wanted to tell you this in person, that I know that the analogy you have used of a stepmother fits the bill, but it is a cliche. So don't use it, because it did hurt me as a stepmom, that, I don't want this for my children. And it sort of is reaffirming the kind of cliche that people had. And I was so... it was so interesting to hear that point of view, because a lot of times we've not experienced certain things. I'm not saying that it's insensitive, but you don't know the kind of impact your words might have on someone. And this is one of the most enduring or most interesting, most amazing feedback that I got, because henceforth I have made it up my life's purpose that I will not use any kind of cliche which talks about relationships or which sort of brings about a negative aspect of a relationship. In fact, the next book that I'm writing about is about a girl who has an amazing relationship with her stepfather. So I'm sort of atoning for my sins, so to speak.
See, well, there you go. That's good feedback from that reader. That's great. And it helps you kind of get some context from their perspective. I like that. That's great. And so you've kind of given us a little hint. And one of my questions I like to ask authors, because the name of my show is Living the Next Chapter. So I need to know from your perspective, you kind of let us know already, how are you living your next chapter? Another book in the works then?
Two of them.
Two more books. Of course there is. Good. Tell us more. What can you tell us?
The first book is a romance, which is my third most favorite genre in the world. In fact, each time I read a heavy book, it's sort of a palate cleanser for me. So I read a romance.
Right.
Sort of to get back into the whole mood of reading again. So it's a romance which is sort of deals with the two timelines of the same person. And the other book that I'm sort of still researching and writing, I'm about 50% or maybe 40% down, is a mystery, which is my first love, about a mystery in set in India. Okay, I usually will write only about India. I'm really stuck up about that because I feel there is just so many stories that we have that I feel should go out. It's just I don't need to look at anyone else. I just have so much in my own country. So I usually would write only about India and about Indians. Um, okay. I have to I'll slow down. When I get excited, I tend to talk faster. Sorry.
We're with you. We're with you. Keep going. This is good.
So the second one is a mystery. It's about a woman who's a police officer and she quits her job and she becomes a private investigator or a private dick as it was called earlier. And she discovers history, parts of mysteries in Indian histories, and she equates it to the present, and that's how she solves the case. So that's all I can say. Otherwise, it would be spoilers.
Okay. No, we don't want to give it away. And that's great. Do you have a timeline at all for your next few books at all?
I hope to finish the romance one by December.
Okay.
That's my personal deadline. Generally, we say that if your two books come out within 2 years of each other, they sort of play off each other and sort of generate sales. I don't know how far it is true, but that's the plan.
Well, you have a lot of writing ahead of you. A lot of words. A lot of words are going to be on paper and writing. That's exciting. And I'm excited to have you on the show. And again, like we mentioned, I just love the fact that you're bringing history forward for us so that we can all learn together. And I think that's one thing we need more great authors like you sharing historical facts and stories and shining a light on some times that weren't always the best times, but there's lessons for us to learn in that process. So I'm excited for that.
There was this, one specific. Should we talk about that specific?
Yes,
story?
I would love to. Yes.
So when I was researching for my book, there are these 1947 partition archives where there are people who sort of have given an oral history, oral sort of story, and people there sort of typed it out for them. And in one of the archives, I came across a story about a woman who had I think she had a toddler and an infant. And so just to very quickly set the context, when the partition actually happened, a lot of people had to move, say, from Pakistan into India. And the only mode of travel at that point was either trains, the army trucks, or people had to walk. And when I mean walk, you're walking with no food, you're walking with no water, you're just walking in large groups, because even while you're walking, you could be attacked by a mob at any given time. So it's very unsafe. You're walking on streets which are full of dead bodies of people who've already died. So there is a health risk anyways involved. So this woman was walking with her husband, her two children, and their group got attacked by a mob, and her husband died in the whole aftermath of the mob. So she keeps walking. She has a toddler son and an infant, and she's walking, and there's no food. You have these sort of pit stops where you just stop to rest. And someone had food, they would share. If not, they would just sort of move on. And at that one point in time, they stop somewhere near a station when the woman realizes that she can't carry both her children. She has to give one of them up. And she decides to leave her elder son, because by that time she has lost her energy, her feet are bleeding, and she knows she can't carry both of them. So she actually leaves her toddler son and she takes her infant son and she walks on. And as she's walking away, there are people who are, yelling that, you've left your son. And that, when I read that, when I read that passage, I couldn't sleep that night. I have a child, and no parent, in my judgment, should ever get to make that decision about which child of theirs survives. And I don't know what went into that woman's head, because they don't track that. But I've used this story in my book, and in my book, the woman sort of died of guilt because she left a child behind. And what, I mean, I don't even know on what basis she took that decision. I mean, of course, I know on what basis she took it, but how could she take that decision? And for me, any situation that forces you to give up your child is just not worth it.
What a heart-wrenching thing to decide. Which child to keep, which child to leave behind.
Right.
And I can just imagine the child crying out for their mother. They've already lost their father, and you just walk away from your child because you can't physically carry them both. That is just like heart-wrenching.
In my book, I've used twin girls. They're sort of a metaphor for India and Pakistan. And in one of the interviews that happened in the book, the girl who survived, but the girl who was chosen, she says that my mother gave birth to me twice. Once when she actually gave birth to me, and once when she chose me and not my twin sister. And I can never imagine what that the mother must have gone through. The kind of guilt.
Right.
It's a lifetime of misery. Parent.
Well, I'm glad you brought that story in. You kind of changed it a little bit for your book, but you brought that story in so that we have that. Again, like I said, when you and I met and talked about the podcast and you coming on the show, you told me that story. I told my wife, and I'm like, I have 3 children. I don't know how I would ever do that. That would be the end of me to have to make that kind of choice. Yep. I don't know. So,
I was just thinking how desperate she must have been to be led to that decision where she has to choose which of the child that she's given birth to she has to leave behind, and which one she's going to take. And I don't know if the child survived. I mean, not. But if he did, I don't know if he would know.
So, Natasha, as far as finding you, connecting with you, purchasing the book, where do we send our listeners? How do they reach out and speak with you and connect with you?
The book is available on Amazon. It's called Beneath Divided Skies. I think it's available almost everywhere. Europe, Canada, India, of course India, US, UK, so on and so forth. How you can contact me at my website. It's natasha-sharma.com. You can email me from there. I would love to hear it. Irrespective if you get the book or not, I would love to chat. I think they know how much I love to talk.
Oh, yes. You've proven that today. Again, Natasha, thank you so much for doing this. What I love about the internet is that I can sit here in Canada and have an amazing conversation with you. You can inspire the world through a podcast, share your story, and now we have listeners in India, we have listeners in Canada, all around the world listening to this, who now know of you, your book, the amazing things that you've written about, and now they can go and support you from all over the world. So it's amazing what we can do today to connect with people like this. So thank you for giving us your time and to do this with us. I really appreciate having you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's just so amazing to talk to someone who, who's willing to listen about some other culture. It's so amazing. Thank you.
It's a beautiful part of the world where you're from and where you are, and I think more people need to go there and know more about your part of the world. So thank you for writing your book, and we're looking forward to more great things from you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Excellent. Everyone, all the information is always in the show notes. Please go and support our authors, and when you buy Natasha's book, leave a very interesting, detailed review so that people understand why this book is so important. And make sure you share this episode with your friends and family. We have listeners, again, around the world. You need to share this episode so more people know about Natasha, her book, The Partition, and all of this history that we can learn from. So Natasha, again, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you once again.
Hey, thanks for listening to Living the Next Chapter. I'm glad you stayed all the way to the end. You're my new bestie. And the one thing I like to do with my besties is enjoy time together over a cup of coffee. Now, one thing missing in the equation is my coffee cup is empty. And what I would love if, after 390 plus episodes roughly, if you found any value in the podcast and you want to say, hey, Dave, do you need a refill of your coffee cup? I'm looking at it right now, and you know what? It's looking kind of sad. There's not much in the coffee cup. If you want to help support the podcast, I would love you forever as besties and celebrate coffee with you. You can celebrate and support the show at our website using our Buy Me a Coffee link. And all the money goes back into the podcast. And we also like to give it to other podcasters. So if you want to support the show, head over to livingthenextchapter.com and let's top it up. Thank you guys. Thanks for listening. Cheers.